A subject that doesn't get enough attention is the role that Christian academics play, even to this day, all over the world. Now, this is a huge problem here in Ireland because until very recently, basically Irish archaeology and antiquities was overseen by a religious fanatic, a Jesuit, who was an extreme Catholic, who did good work in a lot of subjects, I have to say that, but also brainwashed his students, even his so-called atheistic students, into a Catholic or a Christian identity of Irish antiquities. Now, for instance, he wrote a very good book on, well, in terms of its study and its resources, on the Irish swastikas, on early Irish Christian art, and was using language along the lines of it was, a salutation of the glory of our Christ's resurrection. And this is a guy who was teaching PhD level courses. I've heard one of his lectures online where he talks about how St. Patrick was a lovely man, and when the pagans met him, they all became Christians because he was such a lovely man. And he's teaching this in University College in Dublin. The simple fact is that he was an honest academic, and even the people who studied under him were honest, and honest atheists, I might add. They would immediately realize that St. Patrick never actually existed. St. Patrick was invented in the 8th century by a bishop who commissioned a monk to write the history of a fictional Irish evangelical figure. This is about 400 years after St. Patrick was supposed to have been here. And he never existed. St. Patrick's a fictional character. And although there may have been, Christian missionaries, early ones on, like him, who came on behalf of Rome, and did appalling things like murder Druids and so on, very likely. He was given a new name and a new identity, or made into a composite centuries later to make him look like this wonderful guy who saved Ireland from paganism. And these guys are digging up ancient sites around this country, still believing, with their talking about reason, I'm for reason, I'm for truth, I don't get caught up in woo. And here they are writing in their papers and reports about St. Patrick, who, if they had any honesty, they would know as a fictional character. Even the Wikipedia page says that, well, although St. Patrick only shows up in documents in the 8th century, we should not discount that he probably... Hold on a second, you do that with things that are not Christian. You see, the academics tell you something the academics have their own version of woo. And St. Patrick is a classic example of academic woo. Now, this guy who was teaching his Christian overlay was notorious for his misogyny. He used to say that women had no place in academia. Teaching the classes, and got away with this. And they were talking about a guy who died in 2012, not a guy who died in 1912. Another thing he did, he was good in some ways. He was one of the first academics to, because you can't deny it, that say Grin on the Aonach, on top of the mountain in County Donegal, the circular fort, was not a fort because it was useless as a defensive structure. Was actually almost, he said that it was probably pagan because it was circular. Pagans loved the circles and the curves. Romans and Christians loved the boxes. And that's fair enough. And he showed that that definitely on Inishmurray Island, the early Christian settlement there was probably a pagan druidic site because it was surrounded in something called a cashel, a circular or almost circular ring around the early Christian site. In fact, if you go to any Christian site in Ireland that has this cashel around it, it's definitely pagan. And then he says the round towers of Ireland are definitely Christian, but they're round. Now, I'm going to write a book on about why I think they're not Christian, but specifically the whole thing was that the whole argument rests on the idea that it was built with a cement lime mortar that was typical to Roman construction. Now, somehow this bizarre idea is based on the notion that early Irish pagans, 2,300, 500 years ago, were not capable of making ships and going to Britain and Europe and learning how to do this and bringing it back to Ireland. See, this is the idea that the Irish were monkey men. They were monkey. They were, ooh, 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 ooh. This is how they were before Christianity came to Ireland. And this is how Irish archaeologists and antiquities are still teaching, practicing, writing about to this day. And this is because of the influence. Now, the influence of, they try to make out, well, that the story of the round towers having the door up was to stop the Vikings from attacking the monks. Well, we know that's bullshit because you can burn it down. The reason why the door is up is because it actually is structurally stronger when you raise it off the ground. But in fact, if you look at some of the earliest round towers, it was a learning process. Scattery Island, which is down the mouth of the Shannon, the door is at ground level. They discovered that there was actually more structural strength on the load if the door was up higher and not at the bottom, which is shows a process of engineering that actually did not develop as quickly as they think. It was developed over time, even though the round towers are all very similar. I don't want to go too much into this now, but it just shows that this idea that you heard a thing like phantom time, that there's a very good theory, very interesting theory, that the Middle Ages didn't even exist. They were invented by the Vatican to compensate for huge discrepancies in the Julian calendar, when it changed to the Gregorian calendar. So there's all kinds of things that, it's really, when you start looking into it, you really have to go in with a blank sheet and begin again. Yes, academia is great for cataloguing, examining, retrieving. They have the infrastructure and the resources and the disciplines to do that. But in terms of their theories of the past, remember, they're still theories. They're not hard and fast rules. There's loads of things we don't know, and loads of things, there's huge amount, like the so-called area of the Middle Ages, there's vast amounts of missing documentation. They say things like that there was no writing in Ireland before the Romans arrived, or the Christians arrived. Absolutely nonsense. There was Ogham. There was always a form of writing. This does not also imply backwardness. The Greeks had writing before. This is a very Roman thing, this idea that if the Romans and the Vatican took it over, that if it didn't, Roman Christian I might add, that it was backward. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. You see these universities in places like Cambridge, they have names like Mary Magdalene and Christchurch, and they say, oh, well, we're purely secular places now, but they're not really. We're still living with the legacy of the ancient Christian scholars, of the past being just added to and augmented going forward. Remember that, when someone comes up to you and says, well, it's been established as fact about this date, and, this to do with the Vikings, or to do with you're dealing with people who have been schooled in Christian philosophy, and even in 2017, it hasn't changed. Just do your own journeys, but not online by Googling. Go out there in the field and